This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Today I chat with leading sports psychologist Dan Abrahams, who's worked in the football or soccer industry for a number of years now and supports different players, coaches and teams in the top echelons of the Premier League. Our conversation in the main is football related, though it does cross over to other sports, where Dan adds to my recent research in the podcast and explains in his opinion why players struggle to replicate their form from the training pitch to match days. We touch on performance anxiety, his approach to the use of mental skills, and how as a sports psychologist we can educate coaches the importance of psychological and social factors in this regard, as well as a whole lot more. So Dan, where did your interest in football or soccer come from?
As a kid, Dave, I suppose, really, I was always a football fan, soccer fan. I played a little bit, but not a great deal or to any kind of level. And in terms of working in the sport, my background is as a professional golfer and a golf coach. And when I became qualified as a sports psychologist and decided to go down that career pathway, I obviously knew golf like the back of my hand, and I kind of felt, well, look, I want to work across sports, but I'd like to have a few sports that I suppose, specialize in, and where I really know the language and really know, the specific challenges that players face. And to be quite honest with you, the obvious sort of first stop there was going to be, football, soccer. And so I got started pretty much straight away, really, about 15, 16 years ago, and started in non-league, again, to really build my knowledge of the sport, the language, the specific challenges. And it all snowballed from there, whether it was, working with Premier League players and Premier League clubs and writing books about it and articles every day and trying to build up a bit of a name for delivering, for demystifying sports psychology within football, across all sports, but within football, and just building from there, really. So, it's time clicks on. It's been, as I say, 15, 16 years now working quite heavily in the sport. So I don't know whether that makes me seasoned with it or not, but that's what I've been doing.
You mentioned there about challenges. Let's start with that. So one of the challenges I noticed, both at elite level and with youngsters, but we'll start with youngsters, be it grassroots or academy, is transferring their skills from training into match situations. It's a broad question, but feel free to delve into that topic.
Yeah, thanks for that very broad question. And you as a sports psychologist, are mentioning or describing it as a broad question because, we know there's so many individual differences out there from that perspective. But look, if we take it from a global perspective, clearly when it comes to game day, players are going to experience a higher volume of anxiety, or many players are going to experience a higher volume of anxiety than they do in training. There's not a lot of repercussions, real or imagined, if you get things wrong in training. I mean, there can be some, but it's not the same as game day. And so what happens? You experience anxiety, doubt, worry, fear. You can experience as a consequence of that a drop in confidence. You can become easily distracted. You can play inhibited. You can experience as a consequence of emotional constructs such as anxiety, a rise in intensity levels, and then maybe even a drop-off in intensity levels. I mean, that's been my experience, Dave. I don't know about you, but there can tend to be a real inconsistency as a consequence of the negative feelings and emotions, or unhelpful, I should say, feelings and emotions that one might experience on game day. So the long and short of it, mate, is that I'm really passionate about players having a framework to the mental side of their game. Over the past 15 years working in football and across all sports, all too often I feel I sit down with a young player, but an elite player as well, but young players, and they're unable to articulate what they want to achieve mentally on the pitch, what they want to achieve mentally on game day. And I think they need that. Because of the reasons that I've mentioned, because of the real or imagined stress that that's being put upon them. And so really, a lot of my work, when we're talking about the performance side of things, is to go in and help players have that mental skills framework or mental framework. And so over the years, the way I've gone about things, Dave, is I've kind of taken the psychological literature, tried to demystify it as best I can without completely losing efficacy around the theory and making stuff up. So I'm trying to be theoretically underpinned. I'm trying to be evidence informed, but trying to create tangible, practical, applicable, simple techniques that players can go and execute. So for example, I talk to players about having a game face. I talk to players about having a match script or a game script. I talk to players about squashing ants, using controllers, raising bars, being in HPM, high performance mindset. And we can delve into any of those if you so desire. But that's what I'm trying to do. Let's create a framework, a practical framework that they can go and execute that's going to potentially alleviate the anxiety and unhelpful emotions and feelings and sensations that atrophy their performance.
That makes a lot of sense. Obviously, you're talking there a lot about the language, and yes, you use the evidence-based stuff, the theories, but yeah, a footballer isn't going to really take that on board if you're having a conversation with them, not fully. So yeah, I get that. Let's go with an example so we can dig into some of these frameworks.
Yeah.
So assuming I'm a player who does get anxious before a game, I start games slowly, jittery, and my confidence is low. Can you talk me through some of those frameworks and what I could potentially expect in some sessions from yourself?
Yeah, sure, certainly. And these things can be challenging to describe because they're never really unidimensional. And often you're going in from a multi-dimensional perspective, and by that I mean there's never sort of one solution that is going to be the overarching solution. So what I would say to you here is I'd underpin what I'm about to say with this philosophy, that I would try to help a player turn down the volume of importance around game day. Turn down the volume of importance around performance on game day, and up the volume of importance around mindset. Let's talk about a game face. So with reference to what I've just said, I want players to be less focused on, I've got to perform, it's game day, I've got to perform, I've got to impress, I've got to stay in the team, I've got to show the coach how good I am, I've got to score, I've got to keep a clean sheet. Those exist, and I'm trying to, over time, shift that extreme language away from I've got to, I must, I should, to I'd like to. These are some outcome and performance goals I'd like to achieve, but I want them to be focused, or I'd suggest that they be more focused on, let's say, something like a game face. You mentioned a couple of minutes ago that footballers don't necessarily want to hear the psychological jargon that we learn about and cherish. Things like individual zone of optimal functioning. Right. Now, I say that, or self-efficacy theory. I say those two things, individual zone of optimal functioning and self-efficacy, because they're kind of the two psychological theories that underpin a game face. It's much easier to say game face than it is individual zone of optimal functioning. So I help players to create a game face. What is a game face? It is your optimal mental state. It's the personality you want to portray on the field of play. It's the attitude you want to have. It's the style in which you want to execute every action, every responsibility. I'll give you an example to illustrate what a game face is. I'll give you an example of a game face of a player who I work with, who I'm blessed to work with some pretty good players. And this player would certainly, I would say, would be in a top 20 list of best players in the world right now. And this player has a game face of dominant and relentless, dominant and relentless, dominant and relentless. Sounds quite simple, but dominant and relentless. So when he went into a very, very big game a few years ago, he was creating a story and an inner narrative going into that game of, my job on the pitch is to be dominant and relentless. I'm going to be dominant and relentless for every action and every responsibility, every run, every movement. Everything I do, I'm going to be dominant and relentless. I'm going to hold myself dominant and relentless. I'm going to present myself dominant and relentless. If there's a camera watching me, it's going to see 95 minutes of dominant and relentless with every action and every responsibility. If I miss a chance to score, dominant, relentless. If we go a goal down, dominant, relentless. If my opposition is getting the better of me, I'm going to be dominant, relentless. If my cross goes into row Z, I'm going to be dominant, relentless. If I make a mistake, dominant, relentless. If I have a poor period of play, I'm going to be dominant, relentless. I'm going to say it, be it, do it, act it. Non-stop, no matter what. Nothing and no one takes me away from that. So rather than this player weaving an inner story, a narrative around got to perform, got to win. This is such a big game. I've got to play well. I've got to prove myself. I can't make mistakes. I can't let my teammates down. Very simply, he was just weaving this story around his actions and his responsibilities with these two action-based words, dominant and relentless. And that's what a game face is. A couple of action-based words, often attached. Often I extend that onto perhaps bringing in a model player. So, for example, I'm working with a player at the moment who has a game face of dominant, focused Busquets. So we brought a model player onto these action-based words, dominant, focused Busquets being Sergio Busquets, Barcelona holding midfielder. And this always gets a little bit of a chuckle from players, I might use a concept like an animal. So, for example, I've worked with a very prominent striker in the world game who had a game face of confident, relentless lion. Because he said, I'm like a lion in the penalty area. I'm the king of that penalty area. And that sounds a little bit strange, I know, but that's the way our brain tends to work. It tends to love metaphors. And there's some great work on this by a cognitive linguist called George Lakoff and a philosopher called, I can't remember his first name actually, but it's Thompson, Lakoff and Thompson. And that's, they did a lot of work around this notion of how we function as human beings linguistically is through a great deal of metaphors. So it's a pictorial metaphor. Game face is a pictorial metaphor, and it opens up all of these pictures and sensations and feelings and ideas about how we want to go about our business on the pitch. And so when we've got this game face in place, and when we put that as the most important thing on the pitch, okay, so we've kind of scaffolded down the difficulty of playing in a game by saying, look, I can't force my performance. I've got to let the outcome take care of itself. Okay, and I'm kind of simplifying what I do with players, but I'm cutting it back a bit here. But it's very much, let's let the outcome and performance take care of itself. Let's focus on being dominant and relentless, confident, relentless lion, and so on and so forth. Let's focus on being in our game face. That is a more controllable thing to consider and to focus on. And that's where I want players to be. So no matter what happens, I'm going to be that. That often, when I work with players, more often than not, 8-9 times out of 10, players start to feel, okay, I can achieve that. I can accomplish that. I can go and do that. I can go and be that. I can go and act that. I get that. And there's other stuff I'm working on with them to help that come alive and to help them understand how to go and do it a little bit more thoroughly. But that's the long and short of it. So I want players to have a game face. I want them to go out on that pitch and put that first. I'm going to be in my game face. It doesn't guarantee a great performance. I'm not saying that. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to be 9 out of 10 or 8 out of 10, Dave. Who can do that? We can't do that. But I think this goes a long way to alleviate anxiety because we're focusing on what we can control, and control is a big part of whether how we experience our game day, whether we experience an abundance of anxiety or not, or whether it's adaptive or maladaptive stress that we're experiencing, it goes a long way towards, yes, helping players feel that they're in control, but helping players feel that they can accomplish something. And it helps players to understand that they can turn a 4 into a 6 and a 5 into a 6 and a 6 into a 7 out of 10 game, and so on and so forth. That's what this is all about. Optimizing performance, helping players have their best possible performance. So that's my very long-winded answer there, mate. I'm conscious that I've spoken for that last half an hour, and that's probably the end of the podcast now. But yeah, that's an idea of the kind of thing I might work on with players.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. I mean, to break it down, it's a very simple process, isn't it? And process being a word there, you are getting the player to focus on the process.
Yeah.
The negative language, the don'ts, can'ts, that's cast to one side. And then, as you say, this thing about acting, I know that in your language as well. In effect, they're trying to put an act on the pitch, where some people can struggle with that because they can get just so serious and wrapped up in performance, as you say.
Yeah, I think it's well said. I mean, I think, to a degree, performance has to be is performative, essentially. And, obviously, we talk about, competing in line with your values and as sports psychologists, and there's a lot out there about being, your authentic self. But I also think your authentic self can be who you're striving to be at any given moment. And the reality is that the demands of any sport, but especially in football, it's a demanding game. It works in seconds. You've got to play the demands of the game mean you've got to play at a certain intensity. You've got to pay attention every single second out there. You've got to be on task. You can't afford to drop in a positive intent. You can't afford to play inhibited. These are strong demands, and you've got to have those intrapersonal skills and interpersonal skills, communication and helping others. So all of that adds up to an element of probably most players have to be performative out there. And it's not always going to go right because there's so much in the game that's out of your control. You're going to get teammates who aren't playing very well. You're going to get an opposition who are on fire. You're going to get a day where you wake up and you just feel a little bit lethargic and flat. And so your capacity to do and act through how you feel, do and act through how others are playing, do and act through the challenging contexts that the game is presented to you. That's a very powerful place to be. There are some people who have a bit of a problem with the notion of, fake it to make it, but it's almost like, I always love no matter how under fire she became over time, Amy Cuddy, I always loved her statement of it's not so much fake it to make it, be it to become it. And I think a striker needs to be it to become it out there, and a defender needs to be it to become it. It's just who do you need to be? Well, you probably need to be dominant and relentless, as an example, or any variation of that. So, I think being performative is important. And it's the same on the golf course, mate. With the sport we've both worked heavily in is, sometimes you just got to be performative, act through the tough times, the tough moments, the bogeys, the double bogeys. And I certainly know about that, double bogeys and bogeys, mate.
Likewise. So, right, you've talked about professional football as at the highest level there. Where would you say the differences are, again, in terms of getting back to the original question, transferring your skills when we look at youngsters and compare it to the top level?
Yeah, look, I think it's interesting because I would always say that, I've mentioned the techniques that I would use, and I would say an 8-year-old could have loads of fun being in a game face. What's more fun than being out there? And if your hero is Messi, being, let's say, and an 8-year-old has at that stage a reasonable grasp of language, and let's say an 8-year-old says, "Well, I want to be positive Messi," that's fun to go and do and explore doing that. You're not going to go and beam Lionel Messi. That's not the point here. But why not have some have some fun with that. So a game face is certainly applicable. It's great fun for 10-year-olds to squash their ants. Ants being an acronym for automatic negative thoughts. So why not? It's applicable for the best golfer, the best footballer in the world, just as it is an 8, 9, 10-year-old. In my opinion, that's my opinion. And again, it's not engaging them with any sense of seriousness there. It's fun to do. You're lightly introducing them to very simple mental skills in a fun way where they're involved in that process. I think players of that age can start to develop what I call a match script, which is more around the specific sort of coaching points or actions that you want to work on or focus on out on the pitch. I talk to players about using controllers, which I'll give you one of those as your self-talk. Again, I think young players can utilize that as well. I think we need to be very, very careful in as much as, what we know from, youth sport, grassroots sports is it's by and large, it's the participative level. We want them to enjoy it. We want to develop lifelong participants. And part of the process of developing lifelong participants is not just the enjoyment factor, but also the development of skill, because my understanding is the research suggests that if young people don't get the chance to develop competency in their chosen sports, then quite often they'll give that sport up or that recreational activity up. So we need to be careful not to get into this binary sense of, well, it's just got to be fun, and it's free play. Well, yes, there's a massive part of that. As long as we're not delving into early seriousness from a parental perspective, then we're on safe ground. At the same time, I would always say that a 10-year-old is entitled to take their sport seriously. A 10-year-old is entitled to take their sport seriously. I certainly did, and look back and think, wow, what bad coaching I had when I was 10 years old, because I wanted to be a faster bowler as a cricketer. And all I had from my coach at that time was, you got to get faster as a bowler. No tips, no hints, no technical guidance at all. Just you got to get faster. So I want my coaches to be competent. I wanted my coaches to be competent as a 10-year-old. So I think we need to be careful with this notion of, no, we don't want early seriousness from parents, but if a young player themselves takes it seriously, that's fine. So we come back round to, mental skills. Why not? Why can't we introduce these in a soft, fun, dynamic, participative, inclusive, autonomy supportive way? I think you absolutely can, and I think it's important to do so. And I think you can use the same types of language. And look, these are Dan Abrahams' colloquialisms. You'll have yours, and others will have their thing. And that's incumbent on us to introduce it in the best way possible. Now, we might do that with and through coaches. When it comes to 10-year-olds, we might not have a class of 10-year-olds. We might, but we might not have a class of 10-year-olds in front of us. So we might do it with and through coaches. We might upskill coaches to be able to deliver that. That's cool, and that's fine. But why not? I don't buy into, we can't introduce young people to these kind of things. The last thing to say here, for me, the research evidence backs that up. What we know from personality science is that from the ages from 5 through 8, 9, there's a shift. Young people are starting to get a sense of themselves in the world around them. They're starting to get a sense of their own motivated agency, that they have goals, that others have goals, and they start to maneuver themselves through their goals. Their personality starts to thicken through their goals, through their values. Even though they might not be able to articulate them, they're sort of emerging through their culture, through their parental, through their peer influences, through their own biological influence. So it's emerging, these values, these goals, and these beliefs. That's thickening personality. And so by starting to introducing them to fun forms of effortful control, that's absolutely, is it imperative? I believe it's useful. I believe it's important. And I would regale against anybody who would say no. So that's how I would answer that one.
Okay, so you touched on upskilling coaches there, so coaches can actually do the work of a sports psychologist. Yeah, I suppose what does that look like from a coach's perspective?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, David, because I think that's a really broad. You love your broad questions, mate. Thanks so much for putting me under pressure. It is a broad question because where's your entry point? And I suppose my own cognitive bias here is kind of what I've outlined. There's a good entry point in the mental skills piece, in the performance psych piece. So I think upskilling coaches to be able to incorporate and integrate these kind of mental skills into their coaching environment, I think is a really cool, fun thing to do, my opinion. But also, obviously, we can help upskill coaches, whether it's through articles, through books, through online courses, through social media, through governing bodies and workshops and stuff like that. We can upskill coaches, around their coaching practice. Things to do with autonomy supported versus controlled coaching. What do we know about helping people learn, not just young people, but people learn? What is cognitive science telling us, with the working memory and long-term memory model? What does ecological dynamics tell us, which would be the converse of cognitive science? What do we know about psychologically informed environments and psychological safety? How might that relate to coaching a 10-year-old? Can we introduce them to some very simple linguistic techniques drawn from motivational interviewing and solution-focused brief therapy in order to help them manage behavior? What can we introduce to them around leadership, teamship, relationship? I suppose what I would say is, I think as sports psychologists, we can take a topic, we can introduce them to the evidence, we can introduce them to some scaffolded ideas from that evidence, and then it's a negotiation, it's a co-creation as to how they can take that back into their environment, into their context, into the age group that they're coaching. How is this applicable to you? How can you, what difference does this make to your planning, to your execution, to your reflection? How does this make a difference to how you behave around your players, and so on and so forth, Dave? I just think that's what we can do, is to educate it from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the delivery goes for the coach, it all comes down to time, doesn't it? And in one respect, grassroots, they don't have the time. Even at semi-professional level, there's difficulties with time. So yeah, you've certainly helped educate some of the listeners there, and with regards to some bedtime reading there for them. So I appreciate that. In terms of 3 key takeaways for the listeners from our conversation, what do you think they would be?
Okay. Let's go back over what we've spoken about. So I think in general, actually, and this would be a broad statement, sort of overarching everything that we've said, is, number one, if you can give yourself some time each week, sit down with a pen and a bit of paper, write psychosocial at the top of it, or biopsychosocial if you're a little bit more into the complexity here, and psychosocial plan at the top of the paper, and start to write down what you do and what you want to do from a psychosocial or biopsychosocial perspective. What's the psychosocial delivery here, rather than seeing psychology in a corner or social in a corner, which some coaching models tend to do, and that's fine. Okay. I would probably see it from the perspective of biopsychosocial driving and constantly interacting with the technical, tactical, and physical pieces. So start to consider what your plan is. From that plan, I think tip number 2 would be, try to, when you write stuff down and you research stuff, try to figure out how to deliver in the language of the athlete. How to, if we want to scaffold this, as in to support our players' learning of this stuff, then we want to simplify it. So we want to introduce this stuff in a language that players can grasp, understand, and potentially engage with and implement. So watch your language. Have a plan, number one. Number two, mind your language. Keep it as simple as you possibly can, but no simpler. Number three, I'll tell you what, Dave, we'll do something different. What would be your third thing from what you've listened? What would you add to those two things?
I think I would go for focusing on the process. Cool. So, try to park the performance to one side, the score, the mistakes, that side of thing. And as you say, this relentlessness, things that you can control ultimately. That for me would be the third one.
I love that. And it's interesting, Dave, that it's interesting you picked that, because I think back, because we got to know each other at England Golf, and I think back to the first year I was involved in a coach who I had and have a great relationship and an enormous amount of admiration for, and he's a world class coach. He really a world leading coach in my opinion. And one of the first comments he said to me was, it was actually probably the only time in the 3 years I actually worked with England Golf, I actually respectfully disagreed with him. He said, "Oh, Dan, because I was kind of out trying to, it was one of our first conversations, and I was trying to grasp, where he wanted me to come from and what he might want me to do." And he said, players are just fed up with hearing, stick to the process. And, maybe we've got to mix that message up. And the thing is I think we as sports psychologists continue to say it, not only because, there's nothing true as such in sports psychology, and possibly nothing particularly true in life, or very little, but it's probably the most effective and efficient way to view the best approach towards performance. And I just think that what I'm trying to say here is I just think players are really, by and large, poor at focusing on the process, especially under pressure, because everything about pressure takes you away from the process. But we can say this till we're blue in the face, and players still need to constantly remind themselves of this. There's a reason why in the back nine on a Sunday of a major 4 times a year, players in contention are constantly talking to themselves to keep with the process. Not least Phil Mickelson this year, who won the USPGA, and on the 7th tee, his brother, who was caddying, berated him a little bit, sort of saying, "Hey man, if we're going to get a W here, if we're going to win this, we're going to get out of here with a win, you got to start swinging with commitment. You've got to start committing to your swing, committing to your shots. That's a process, right?" And that was Phil going, yeah, bingo, right. And then he started to straighten up, and then started to knock it past Brooks, right? That's how powerful that message can be. And I think that coaches are getting a bit scared of, or even don't know enough about, but a bit scared of process. And they're still, certainly in the industry, in the football industry, the soccer industry, they're still all too oriented towards outcome and performance. I rarely walk into an environment, a coaching environment in football, where there's a predominant message around task and process and mastery over ego, outcome and performance factors out of a player's control. We're still not there yet. So I think you're spot on. I think it's a message we need to continue to bore people with.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, everybody's, I suppose, after the sexy thing, aren't they? The exciting thing, but yeah, it's those boring, simple, relentless things that you've just got to keep on doing, and yeah, it makes life an awful lot easier.
Absolutely.
So Dan, whereabouts can the listeners reach out to you should they want to have a conversation with you?
Yeah, thank you, mate. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak with you. It's been a real pleasure. So I'm on danabrahams.com, and I'm on multiple social media platforms. I've got my own podcast called The Sports Psych Show. Twitter, my main Twitter handle is at DanAbrahams77. I've got another one at Abrahams Golf and at Sports Psych Show. Instagram is at Dan Abrahams Sport. Facebook is at Dan Abrahams Soccer. And I think That's it. LinkedIn, Dan Abrahams. So yeah, I'm a sad man. I should get out more, shouldn't I? Really.
You certainly got a few social media accounts there.
Yes, mate. I have.
Brilliant. Well, I'll certainly put maybe 3 of those on the show notes.
No worries.
But yeah, I appreciate your time. I really enjoyed the conversation, and yeah, keep up the good work with your Sports Psych show as well, and
Dave.
And your different musings on social media.
Hopefully, after listening to this episode, spectators, pundits, parents, grandparents, coaches, and players might well appreciate when a player is not performing at their best, that simply by asking them to work harder and to show more effort is not going to solve the problem. As you'll now appreciate, it's a complex topic, and certainly when players don't perform at their peak on match days, it's not on purpose, and they won't just automatically down tools. There could be many reasons why. So if this is a problem that you're experiencing right now, or that you see someone else is, I'm going to add some more value to this episode and help you unpick some mental blocks that you may have. I'm going to ask you to spend a few minutes and think about the following 6 questions. And if you really want to make a positive shift, then I'd advise you to get a pen and a bit of paper out. That's right, make some notes. So question number 1. At what capacity have I been performing in the last 4 weeks? So is it 50%, 60%, 70%? Be honest with yourself and answer in percentage terms. Question 2. Now this is tough, but it's an essential question for you to answer. So question 2 is, when did I fail on the pitch? That's right. When did I fail on the pitch? So, did you start a recent game slowly maybe? Did you let your teammates down and get sent off through frustration? Or did you hide for a period of time? It could be lots of things. Why did you fail on the pitch? Question 3. When did I not give 100% in a match? So go on, now describe some of the different situations that this happened. Was it pressing your opponents? Was it after you missed an easy chance and let your head drop? Or maybe your team went 2 or 3-0 down and you switched off for a period. Question 4. What frightens you on a match day? That's right, what frightens you on a match day? Is it the fear of making a mistake and being berated by your coach or costing your team a goal? Do you worry about letting your teammates down? That's right, question 4. What frightens you on match day? Now, for question 5, and this one's a painful question. What is it costing you and your team by playing in fear? I'll repeat that. What is it costing you and your team by playing in fear? Maybe it's a new contract. Could be goals for the team, more chances created for the centre forward, or points for your team. And then personally, and importantly, just the sense of satisfaction, the joy of celebrating goals and assists, playing with a smile on your face perhaps. Make a note of it. What is costing you and your team by playing in fear? And then lastly, question 6, and a lot more positive. What are you going to do about your fears? Some people will look to do something about it. Others, they'll listen to this and they'll just continue as normal. I'm hoping you're going to recognize that you do have some choices available and you go on to choose the first one and do something about it. That you do go on and make some changes. Let's face it, you could then experience a lot more joy, fun, and banter on the pitch. And if you'd like to discuss this topic in more depth with me, please do feel free to drop me a message via social media or an email. My email address is info@sport-excellence.co.uk. All the links to social media and the email will be in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sport psychology resources. The Sport-Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.